Test 1 2, test 1 2. All right, guys, we're gonna get started here in a few minutes. As you come in, if you just want to type in the chat box, we'll get started. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them as we move forward. All right, guys, it's been a long time since I've done one of these. Hopefully, all the kinks have been worked out. We're gonna get started here in a minute. I expect people to kind of be in and out. Obviously, this will be on the channel. So if you have any questions or you didn't get a chance to catch it live, it'll be there for you guys to check out. I'm really excited about this new program, a new direction that we're taking. Varsity Edge, it's a little bit different than what we did with Air Raid Nation and 92 Mesh Group over the years, and just kind of excited to kind of do this new more free model where we're just going to be posting stuff to the YouTube page, and then all the ancillary materials, the presentations and all the handouts and things like that will be over on the website that you can do that. And if you appreciate this kind of stuff and all the stuff I've done over the years, consider joining the website over at varsityedge.com. The membership's something like $5 a month, or there's even a place where you can just donate if you want to help me be able to keep doing these kind of things, because obviously keeping the website and all the software and stuff like that's not free. But this has kind of been a passion of mine over the years to try to help coaches and do those kind of things. So if you're kind of hanging out with us tonight, if you just type in the chat box kind of where you're watching from, that would be kind of cool. I'll be checking that from time to time. Just kind of like in the old days when we would do these things. We're gonna go through the presentation and then kind of do a Q&A at the end. But we're gonna try to keep it a little bit more informal and do it. And so if there's something that you really want to talk about, just kind of throw something in the chat, and I'll try to go back and forth and look at those kind of things. But the YouTube space and the coaching niche has changed so much since I started back in 2019 with my very first channel and very first video with Coach Salas, and then of course doing CoachTube for years and building up Air Raid Nation and 92 Mesh Group, and then of course getting out of it for a little while and selling Air Raid Nation over to One Back Football. And still, of course, if you still miss all that old content, you can go over to One Back Football and see all the old videos and things like that. And of course, if you have any questions about any of those things, you can always follow me on Twitter at Coach Coltharp, or on Instagram at Coach Coltharp, or on TikTok at Coach Coltharp. And send me messages, and I'll be more than happy to kind of clarify any of that old information. I may have to go back and watch the video again myself because it's been a while, but um, those kind of things were really cool to do back in the day. And now my focus is really on developing coaches. I still do a little air raid stuff on the side, but mostly it's building systems and helping you build your brand and doing those kind of things, and helping coaches organize their thoughts and develop and teaching methods, which are super, super important if you want to develop into an effective coach, especially moving forward with all the tools with AI and all the technology. Staying ahead of the game is so much more important. And I would say that the most important part of that is doing the being organized and having a system, and not relying on that stuff, but making that stuff make you a better coach instead of letting it do all the work. I know I see a lot of different things where people are like, hey, this AI can make these plays for you, or this AI can do that for you, and all that's cool, if it kills time. I actually have some stuff. I've got a video coming out here pretty soon on the channel about developing your own football GPT to help you do some certain things, and that should be debuting sometime next week. I'm really excited about that. That was pretty cool. There's some free resources over on the Varsity Edge website that you can check out. One of them is quick prompts to put in Chat GPT to help you break down game film if you upload clips and things like that. Just some quick stuff to kind of give you a jump start on game planning for the week. I think that was kind of cool to do. And then there's actually in the staff room, which is our members area, we actually have the complete instructions on building the complete football GPT assistant. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go over to the website and join. It's a $5.99 a month membership. You can cancel at any time. So if you want to join and then go in there and get the stuff that you want to get out, and then and then cancel, that's cool too. There's also a donation button, like I said, if you want to help out with some of the things that we're doing. I mean, I know this channel is very small right now. I think this is our first live that we've done. And right now we got about 75 subscribers. I know our reach on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter is much larger, but the channel itself is small because we've just not posted and grinded like we did on Air Raid Nation. That took a long time to build up to 10,000 subs. And then of course there's my other channel, Coach Coltharp Connect, where I do a bunch of different things. I do football, cooking, travel, food. It's just kind of me, IRL with some different things in there that we're going to be doing. I actually got another video. Those of you guys who are working on your certification and got to pass a test this summer, got a video coming out in the next week and a half on there to show you how I used AI to pass the Pearson reading test on the very first time to get my EC certification. So those of you guys who are doing praxis and things like that, I got a cool system that I developed to help me pass one of the hardest tests ever, for certification. That was one of those things where I switched over to EC to get a job. And if you're looking to get into coaching, if you get a special ed certification, you can go just about anywhere you want to. So that's something to think about. And I'll show you a system that I developed to help me pass that test. I only studied for 2 weeks, 15 minutes a day, walked in, passed it the first time, and I hadn't had a reading education class in about 20 years. So, something that you can use if you're trying to do social studies or PE or any of those other praxis exams. I've taken both of those over the years, and I know exactly how those are. But the system that I developed to develop the study part is pretty cool. So it's 7 o'clock. We're going to get started. I don't, like I said, if you're in the room and you want to chat, that's fine. I'm just going to go through the program and see how it is. I expect, it being a Sunday night, we might need to maybe move this to a Monday or a Tuesday night so you guys can have your weekend evenings together. But, Sunday night was always our night on Air Raid Nation. So that's how we're going to start this one. But, let's go ahead and jump it off and do the things that we do. Hey, this is Coach Coltharp. Welcome to the Varsity Edge live. This is our first episode, and I thought it would be cool to start off with our new coordinator boot camp. We've been doing a lot of stuff. I've been doing a lot of studying, written a few books lately, and a lot of it's been talking about building systems and organizing your thoughts and stuff like that. And I thought this would be cool. There's a lot of guys who are getting their first chance at leadership and coordination, and a lot of guys want to be coordinators, but maybe don't understand that there's way more to being a coordinator than just calling plays on a Friday night. And what do you have to do to be successful? To to do those kind of things. And so I'm really excited about that, and just gonna jump into it, and and go over those things. Hold on one second. I got a coach texting me trying to figure out how to get here. um So here we go. So like I said, new coordinator boot camp presented by Varsity Edge. Once again, if you want to support the channel, I would love if you join, like, and subscribe. Those are free ways that you can support. If you would like to support in any other ways, go over to the website. You can join the website, or you can donate just to kind of help us do those kind of things. So here's the introduction. We're just going to talk about what's the purpose of the clinic. The purpose of the clinic is to help coaches build structure around the job of being a coordinator. I mean, that's literally what we're doing. Everybody wants to be a coordinator, but what does that mean? So we're going to spend about the next 30 to 45 minutes talking about that. In my experience, I had an opportunity to be an offensive coordinator at the college level, defensive coordinator several times. Actually, I'm just starting off as a defensive coordinator again at my new school. Head coach asked me to take over the defense this spring, and so we've been doing that, and that's been an interesting process. What's the goal of the clinic? Obviously, the goal of the clinic is to provide some practical ideas for you guys to um to be able to improve how you communicate. And I'm sorry if I pause, guys, it's just because I'm getting the screens together. I'm trying to move the chats around so I can see um what's going on here, there, and everywhere else. It's been a while since I've done these, but we want to be able to improve your communication, your actual workflow, your practice organization, and how you make decisions throughout the week. And I think that's where a lot of guys get themselves in trouble. They get overwhelmed, doing different things. And then, basically, by the end of the clinic, I hope that you're able to build a more organized weekly process. And I think that will help you as we do that. Creating better communication structures and things of that nature. So I've got some slides I'm going to run through. Not going to read them to you because I hate sitting in meetings when guys read them to you, but I'll have them up there If you'd like a copy of the presentation, it'll be over on the website in the staff room, so you can check that out too. But really, most coaches think becoming a coordinator is about calling plays. And that's the fun part of it. But really, the job is about building a plan that players and coaches can execute consistently under pressure. Effective coordinators do several things. uh Basically, they're able to teach clearly, they're able to organize the week, they're able to prepare for different kind of situations, and then they're able to connect their practice to their game plan. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I learned over the years is that, just don't practice stuff because that's how things were practiced. My high school coach did things a certain way, my college coach did things a certain way. So when I got my first head coaching job, which I was also the coordinator, then it just was, hey, this is what we're gonna do, and never really understood how you connect A's and B's and things like that. How often are you going to be in goal line? How often are you going to be in third and long? How often are you going to be in a 2 minute drill? So being able to recognize how those things work. So understanding what the real job of the coordinator is, I think is one of the most important things. But the big takeaway from that is that your job is to create structure that supports execution under pressure. The Navy SEALs always said when things get hard, you want to revert back to your training, and your job is to make sure that you've prepared your players during the week and in the off season and in the preseason, so that when things present themselves, your players like, oh, we've been there before. That's no kind of big deal. So why do some coordinators struggle? That's a big thing. um it's not a football thing. They're usually organizational and prep things. So some of the common things are, you have an inconsistent weekly workflow. One of the things that I learned becoming an air raid guy was that the fact that practice is the same every day. Monday practices are Monday practices, Tuesday practices are Tuesday practices, so on and so forth, but they're always the same. Kids know, hey, this is the drills we're doing today. This is the structure. Like right now in the spring, what I'm trying to develop is, I was talking to the head coach over there. I was like, look, I don't care how much we do. I just want to make sure the kids understand how things work. The very first thing is we're gonna front and stunt on the barrels. We're gonna go through all of our stunts and all of our fronts. That's kind of a walkthrough period. Then we go to 15 minutes of Indy. Then we either go to tackling, or we either go to our team tackling or our team pursuit drill. Then we go to a break. Then we come back and we do inside drill, outside drill. Then we have scaly. Then we have team. And then we finish practice with a situation. It's like that every day. So it breeds this familiarity. I think that's the most important thing. So we try to develop a consistent workflow. Other issues are communications and staff. And I will tell you, one of the things that I'm doing as a new coordinator is, when I talk to kids and when I talk to coaches, if I say a certain thing and then I ask a kid, what does that mean? And he starts giving me a whole lot of gibberish. I make them reply the same way I say it. So like in our stunt package, for instance, when we have a stunt side and we have a solid side. So if they're not on the stunt side, I'll ask them, hey, well, what are you supposed to do? And he starts telling me technique, and I was like, no, tell me solid. That way I know what you understand, and then it's my assistant coach's job to make sure you understand what solid means. And so we're trying to create this common language, and to keep from having those coordinator issues. Obviously, trying to do too much is a huge thing for coordinators. That was another thing that I learned being an air raid guy. Less is more. And I think that's the same. And no matter what offense you're gonna run, less is more is always better. Um, I did a coordinators roundtable, and that video is up on CoachTube, I believe. Still, I think One Back still has it up over there. But we did a whole clinic, and I had 5 or 6 offensive coordinators in here. Some of them were at the college level, and one of the college guys was like, one of the things that we do is I only allow my offensive line to have 8 schemes in their mind going into a game. Whether it's gap, inside zone, 3 protections, 2 screens, whatever it is, but they limit the number of schemes to make sure that execution is better. And I see some of these guys on Twitter and YouTube and stuff like that. I mean, there's some great stuff out there, man. These young guys are putting great videos out, great content out. There's some good podcasts out there, and some of these guys are good friends of mine. Some of these guys I remember when they were young, or some of the guys that I met through this space that are just doing phenomenal stuff. But I'll look at them and they'll have, well, we block this way, and then we turn around and do this way, and then we turn around and do that way, and or we run this coverage, and then we run that coverage, and we run this coverage, and I run that coverage, and I'm like, man, these guys are much better coaches than I am, because I just can't. I can't comprehend having to teach all that stuff and then having my kids to regurgitate that on Friday night. So too much volume, I think, is always an issue. And then your practice structure doesn't match game needs. You go through the whole week, and then you haven't practiced 2 minute drill, and then you find yourself in a 2 minute drill before halftime, and then find yourself in a 2 minute drill right before the end of the game, and you don't execute, and you're not prepared, or you're a defensive team, and you've been practicing, you've been doing 7-off-7 all week, and then you go against a double wing team, and you're not used to those kind of things. So matching up versus who you're going with and putting yourself in situations to practice those structures, I think, is really, really important. And then the other part is just having reactive decision making. You're reacting to what the other side of the ball is doing instead of setting yourself up. I mean, I think that's way more offensively. Having you a first down menu, a third down menu, a short yardage menu. I can remember being with Coach Salas back in the day, and we had an overtime menu. And this was when I was the head coach, and he's the offensive coordinator. We talked about it, and he's like, hey, these are our first four plays, and we found ourselves in overtime, and those were the first four plays we ran, and we scored. And but we went into overtime, and the kids knew what our four plays were. It wasn't going to be reactive. That was scripted. We practiced it, and we put ourselves in a situation where we had a structure which allowed us to be able to execute. So that's another thing. Most of the problems you're going to face on Friday night could have been addressed during the week, and I think that's another reason why coordinators struggle. So 5 systems every coordinator needs. And I think that's really important. If you look at the graphic, you have to have a communication set. And, I spoke to that earlier, about, having a common language. I think that is so important. If you haven't followed Coach Joe Salas, you need to do that. If you found yourself here, Coach Salas is the one that got me started in the area back in 2019. But if you haven't followed him on YouTube, you need to do that, because he's got some great stuff over there. Not only air raid, but culture, and different types of things. But one of the things him and I talked about. He was a coordinator at another school this year, and him and a guy were talking, and they had a conversation about this is what two match meant to him, and this is what two match meant to Coach Salas. And he's like, he took for granted they were saying the same thing, and then a couple weeks into the season they realized they weren't saying the same thing. So having that, sitting down with your staff and having everybody on the same page, I think is huge. If you say a certain thing, your O line coach should say the certain thing, or your D line coach should say the certain thing, outside linebacker coach should say the certain thing. Everything means the same. And I can tell you, my outside backer coach asked me the other day. He's like, "Hey man, when you mean spill, what do you mean? This, and this, and this." And I told him. He's like, "Okay, that's exactly what I thought it meant too." And so that was really, really important. To make sure that we had that. So, once again, when I say solid, I want the kids to say solid. Expectations, asking questions, or what those communication things are, when you come off the sideline, I think those are huge. So that's the very first one. The second one is having that weekly workflow. And we'll go through these kind of one by one and kind of give you some examples of what I'm talking about with these things. But, what's your Sunday through Friday plan? What's your plan? What's your process? And I think it's really, really important if you kind of draw that out and keep yourself to it. That way, okay, this is what I'm going to do, because you can't try to do it all on Sunday. You can't try to do it all on Saturday. And then if you're still doing things on Tuesday, it should have been done on Sunday, or things on Wednesday that should have been done Monday. I think having a organized weekly workflow, sitting down with your head coach, and identifying what it is you want to do. Like for us defensively, Monday, we're going to show formations. We're going to show the kids formations. We're going to walk through their three best runs and our three best passes. We're going to put in, talk about anything new that we may do, and review teaching from the week before, anything that needs to be corrected that we couldn't correct on film. And then, by Wednesday, we're not putting anything new in. We're not saying, oh, by the way, they did this. and then we show specials on Thursday. So that's kind of how our weekly workflow is. Have your ideas of what you're going to do in situational football. And, that's once again, your first down calls, your third down calls, your nickel calls, your stunt calls. If you've looked, defensively, if you looked at their pass pro, if you got to get home, what are you looking at doing? Which that's going to build your confidence and your identity. Obviously, your call sheets, your installation processes, those are really, really important. And then obviously your practice structure, and I think that's probably the most important thing. I did a video a while back, teaching defense from an air raid point of view, and that's having that same structure every day. I think is very, very important, practice wise. So how you do your structure, how does practice apply to game night? Are you practicing things that you're going to do? If you don't self scout, go back and look at your scripts and say, okay, I ran this play 15 times in practice and I called it once on Friday night. What's the return and investment on that? The ROI. We talked about that a lot on Air Raid Nation. What's your ROI on that is important. I think it's super, super important. So kind of, just kind of the 5 systems you have: your communication, organization, weekly flow, workflow, practice structure, and decision making is good. So, once again, just kind of going back through having that poor communication. Really what your communication should have: several goals, clear expectations. This is what I want. uh, Consistent terminology. I think that's huge. You can't have one coach calling something a bash and another coach calling something a wham, because that just confuses kids. Get a common terminology, stick with it. Um, and go from there. It's gonna do that. Have defined responsibilities. Hey, coach, you're responsible for this. Coach, you're responsible for that. And hold those guys accountable. I talk to my guys all day. My D line coach. We're all learning each other. And the other day he was in there and we were looking, and I was like, hey, look, I need you to look at the stunt side. Well, did you see what so and so? Don't worry about what he did. I need you, when we got stunts going on in practice, make sure the stunt is run correctly. That's huge. Offensively, whatever you have in your running back coach doing, whoever's, whatever those guys are doing, give them defined responsibilities so that everybody knows, hey, look, we're not just watching practice, we're coaching practice. This is what I need you to look for. So, it's Friday nights. Everybody has defined, responsibilities. Hey, who's looking at the top? Who's looking at the sides? Who's watching the pass pro? Those kind of things. Everything is cool. So, as a coordinator, you're defining those things. Um, as a play caller, what information do I need? One of the things that I had a hard time with as a young guy was providing too much information. So you get into that idea of how you call plays, and the information you need to be a more effective play caller, I think is really, really important as well. Um, and then just develop simple answers in stressful situations. What are your simple answers? If things get hard, they asked Joe Montana one time. They said, hey, when you get down in the red zone, what are Bill Walsh's favorite calls? And he was like, base offense. And I think that's really, really important. Finding out what your simple answers are in stressful situations. That's not when you want to get complicated. That's when you want to go back. As an air raid guy, when things get hard, we want to play faster. I think, play fast. When you play fast with tempo, people are going to be more vanilla, and that gives you an opportunity to run your base offense even better. And once again, that's kind of your takeaway. Good communication allows players to play fast, and everybody's on the same page. And that's probably your number one job as a coordinator, is to create a system of communication where everybody's on the same page. Organizationally, you want to have the easiest way to install, practice, and communicate. So you want to have clear terminology. Uh, you want to have things that are interconnected. I can remember being a young football coach. I have an interesting football pedigree. So my high school coach played in the NFL in the '70s, and he was an offensive lineman. So back when I played in the early '90s in high school, a lot of people in our area, we were 21 personnel. We were a pro I team. It was a play action. We were a flood team. We threw some fades. We really, some tight end stuff, but we really weren't very complicated. But it was a hard nose off tackle. We didn't even run power back then. We just kind of ran gap scheme with no puller. And then we ran toss sweep and quick pitch and fullback trap and those kind of things. And then when I went to college, I played my first year at East Carolina with Steve Logan, and we were a one-back offense with a lot of check with me runs. I had never run zone before, had to learn how to block zone and doing all those kind of things, which was new for me. But I remember our two plays. We had Atlanta check and Boston check, and Atlanta check was, hey, we're gonna go up there and find the A gap and run to it, and then Boston check was, hey, we're gonna go find the B gap and run to it. And then, so that was my first, year in college, and then transferring to Appalachian State, we get over there and we're doing some of everything. We were a Nebraska G load team. So, we're running G load option, and then we ran inside zone, or I guess, inside zone or tight zone. And then we ran outside zone back then, but what people call mid zone now. And then we ran a lot of sprint draw. We were a sprint draw team, so we did a lot of those kind of things. So we had all kind of different blocking schemes, different kind of styles, and different kind of things like that. And of course we had some shotgun as well. And so when I got into high school coaching, my high school coach gave me a job, and so I went back into that offense where we were, they had evolved and where they were running power O and doing different things like that, and and so all this stuff comes together. And then when I get my first head coaching job, I got all these hodgepodge of things that I loved. And I'm trying to throw these together. And I realized that, well, this doesn't connect to that. This doesn't connect to that. And then I learned the air raid. And when I learned the air raid, the best thing about learning the air raid for me is it gave me a system. This run and this pass and these passes connected to this and that connected to that and that connected to this. And, that's the cool thing about guys who run wing T and double wing and things like that. I spent the last year and a half in a double wing offense, just having those if thens, and if they do this, we do that, and everything's kind of melded together. So if you're in a situation like that and you're in an offense that has connected concepts and adjustments and simple teaching progressions, you're just ahead of the curve. But if you haven't, you have to figure out how to develop that out of what you're doing. And then of course you always have to have answers to common problems. What if I'm getting pressure? What if I'm getting an 8-man box? What am I going to do to bear front? What am I going to do to man coverage? A lot of people, we joke all the time being an area guy, you'll go to 7-on-7 in the summertime, and people will play you 2-man and you think you can't throw the ball. And then you just realize if they played us 2-man on Friday night, we'd be running, GT counter all night long and rush for 300 yards if you're smart. But just having those defined answers, what problems you're going to get. So being able to conceptualize to your team and having that organization and saying, hey, if we get these things, these are the things we're going to do. But if you ever find yourself saying, I hope they don't do that, then you have an organizational issue and you need to fix that. But your players need to feel like everything is interconnected. And I think over the past 20-25 years, some things have changed. These kids, you have to explain to them why now. I don't know. When I was a kid, when I asked my mom why, after I got up out of the floor, she'd look at me and say, because I said so. That's old school, old school. Coaches used to be the same way. But now these kids want you to explain to them why we're running this play, and then we run that play instead of running this play and then run that play. So having your kids understand why you're doing the things you're doing and how things connect, I think is really, really important. And it just makes things easier to execute because the kids understand what you're going on. So guys, if you have any questions as I'm going on, if you just want to, type something in the chat box, I'll be more than happy to kind of address that. We're just kind of going through. Here's kind of a sample weekly workflow. If you're a new cat, and this kind of works offensively and defensively. Just as kind of a workflow we develop. So Sunday, obviously, and this and that Sunday, that's part of Saturday. Like for me, I don't do anything on Saturday mornings. Really, I don't start I'll look at the film, around 12 o'clock. I just kind of see what's going on a little bit. Hey, what's the base offense? What's the base defense? That kind of thing. When I'm a head coach, defensively, I look and say, all right, are they spread? Are they T? What are they? What are they doing? Kind of get my mind around it. And then I'm gonna watch a football game. I'll watch a college game or something like that for a little while, just kind of get away from it. And then Saturday nights when I really start jumping into things, texting back and forth with the head coach, or if I'm the head coach, I'm texting back and forth with the coordinator saying, hey, kind of what do you have going on? I assign the assistants have certain jobs, certain guys ODK things, certain guys label certain things. So I expect them to kind of have that done by Sunday morning, because we want guys to be with their families and things like that. So we'll self scout, go back. Defensively, we do a production point system. We don't grade. Guys get a certain number of points based on things that they do in the game. I mean, a guy can play horrible, but then he gets a pick six and you win the game. And you're gonna tell him, hey, dude, you didn't play well. You graded out as a 47%, but that touchdown won us the game. So, we kind of do that. What they do is like for every 5 tackles, they get a point. Fumble recovery, you get a point. Pass breakup, you get a point. Those kind of things. I got that from Will Muschamp years ago. Um, once they get to 30 points, they get a t-shirt. 75 points, they get a different color t-shirt. 10 points, they get a sticker. And we give stickers out on game days, Friday afternoon before we go out. I reward the stickers to the guys from the previous week. So we're more of a production-based defense. So we'll self-scout, do the points, do those kind of things on Sunday, kind of get our basic game plan together. And if you have a system, you kind of know what your base offense is or your base defense is. Kind of hopefully you have that put in and so there's not a lot of change. And if you find yourself having to make super changes every week, hey, this week we're going to do this week then we do that, then I think you need to go back to your organization and your systems and say to yourself, hey, what are we doing that we're having to make all these changes? I know, one year when out of school, I was a defensive coordinator. We went against 10 different offenses in a season, and we didn't have to make a ton of changes. We did a tweak here, a tweak there, but our system was able to address a double wing, a spread, a wing tee, you know, a double slot, those kind of things. Just to be able to do, we had ways to address that within our system to where we weren't having to make wholesale changes or throw in new coverages and do those kind of things. And I think that's super important. If you have a system like that, if you don't, you need to start developing that. We got some stuff on the channel. And there's some good stuff out there on CoachTube and other places where you can see how other guys are doing that. um, and just kind of figure out, hey, what do you got to do to win? Some weeks, you're playing against a super high powered offense. So your job is, hey, look, man, can I just create, two turnovers or two change of possessions? If they punt twice, we got a chance. Or offensively, look, they got a really good offense, so we need to keep them off the field. So ball control is the story of the week. So that's kind of your Sunday plan. Staff meetings are so much easier than they used to be. We don't meet in person anymore. We used to meet at school and do all that stuff on Sunday afternoons and be out there all hours of the night. Now we just kind of zoom it up. We meet at 8 o'clock on Sunday night. We Zoom. It's an hour with the offense, and then we meet as a staff in between the two meetings, and then we meet as an hour on the defense. So the head coach is in there for about 2.5 hours, but everybody else is just one staff's an hour, the other staff's an hour. We just kind of talk about basic stuff for the week, and that's kind of cool. I like how we do that. So Monday you're going to install and teach. Obviously that's pretty easy. Your Tuesdays and Wednesdays is when you're going to do your position meetings, your install. That's your get after it practices during the week. And then by Wednesday, you're starting to make some corrections. You're really looking at your situations, making sure everybody on staff understands what's going on. And then Thursday, you're doing your situational walkthroughs. That's when you're, hey, third down, this is what we're looking at. First down, this is what we're looking at. This is kind of our pressure. This is what we're trying to do with this. This is what we're trying to do with that. And then Friday, obviously that's game day, and then Saturday going back again, and it starts all over. So but if you have this kind of weekly workflow, it kind of helps you. So if you haven't developed that, and as a new coordinator, this is something that I think that you really need to look into, is just how are you going to go through your week. And if you can stay on that process, it'll help you be more organized as you go into it. And as you can kind of see, man, these are just things that you maybe not think about, or you have to do, but you need to write it down and say, okay, hey, this is what I'm gonna do. What, Monday, what situations do I need to be prepared for this week? For us, are we going to be in our base defense, or are we going to be playing a lot of nickel? I think that's super important. Kind of what's your practice schedule looking like? Are you repping the things that you're going to need to do? If you're playing a lot of, a heavy running team, are you doing a lot more short yardage, a lot more heavy stuff this week? What are your situational practices? Situational systems. Again, I can't talk about situations more than anything. Prepare yourself for situations. What are you doing? Have your guys in practice understanding, hey, it's third down. Create that situation in practice. Third and medium. Let's get off the field, or third and short. Let's get this first down and create those situations. Make those guys aware for it. So then on Friday night when it happens, oh man, we've been in third and six 20 times this week. So we know these are the calls to expect. This is how we're gonna get into it. These are the things that we're gonna do. It helps you be more efficient in practice. I mean, you don't want to be standing around a lot. You want to have these things planned out. And I've got some practice plans and some practice plan wizards over on the website as well. If you haven't seen it, our practice genie is pretty cool. Something I've developed over the years where you can actually put your drills in, change your drills, change your periods and all that kind of stuff. It's a spreadsheet, so it's click, click, click. You add your drills in, so every individual period has a drop down menu. It's something I've been using over the years, and it's pretty cool. So you can check that out. And by the way, free members get a copy of that for free. So if you've joined the website, there's a free download on that. Other than that, I think it's a couple bucks. But those repetitions are going to create confidence with your players. And once again, if players find themselves in a situation that they've been in before, I think that's super super important. For them to be able to respond once they find themselves in that situation on game day. So once again, practice needs to be about getting them ready to Friday. Even the level of contact that you're doing on Friday. One of the things I like to use all the time. I use that term GTF. Get to Friday. I think that's most important. There ain't sense in beating the hell out of each other on Friday nights, and then you're hobbling. Oh, but we're gonna be tough. We're gonna be this. Yeah, you're gonna be tough on Tuesday, but on Friday night you're gonna be wobbling because you've been knocking the piss out of each other all during the week. So, you got to be able to balance the level of physicality, and by looking at your practice schedule and saying, okay, hey, we're gonna be physical here, but maybe not so physical there. Even just looking at that in general will help you plan for that, and not just going out there and doing things randomly. And that doesn't matter what level you are, whether you're youth, middle school, high school. I think it's important, and decision making is super super important. I think when you're doing your situations, I think that's especially offensively, having yourself defined situational menus are really really important. Being able to communicate during the game, who's communicating the coverage, who's communicating the stunt, who's communicating this, who's communicating that. That's important. So having that process in place, and talking to your head coach or talking to guys who have done it before, who's doing this, who's doing that, who's talking, if you're a coordinator that's calling from up top, who's talking to the linebackers, who's talking to the D line, what are we talking about, who's meeting with them during the groups, who's responsible for saying this, who's responsible for saying that. That's super super important. And then once again, if you haven't practiced it, don't do it. I had that conversation the other day, and in practice, somebody said, hey, I want to put somebody at D line. We were doing a team drill, and I was like, nah. He's like, well, I was like, well, he hasn't practiced that. um so that's super super important. That we're doing those kind of things. And that gives you simple answers versus common problems. And then you also be able to understand who you are as a team, because you have these certain this kind of deal with the internet. I don't know, I'm having a little internet issue, it looks like. um So if you have a little, if it wobbles a little bit, guys, I apologize. Like I said, it's the first time we've done a stream in forever, so there's going to be some kinks in this one. I'm sure we'll get it all worked out as we move forward. So once again, confident decisions usually come from organized preparation. I think that's really important. So here's kind of another thing that you want to think about as a coordinator is are you doing a reactive play calling versus structured coordination. You're hunting answers. Hey, what do we like here? Versus if you're a structured guy, you already have a first down menu. You already have a third down menu. You have a goal line menu. You have a organized you know, what is it we're talking about? We have an organized overtime schedule. What your weekly workflow is going to do that for you. If you've intentionally practiced things, if you know what your calls are, if you know who you are as a team, it's going to make you a much better guy than somebody who's like, well, we're just going to do this today, or we're going to do that today, or we have all these concepts and we have all these plays. And then on Friday night, you call something and it don't work. And then on Saturday, you're like, man, I should have called this. Well, that's because you haven't been structured. You haven't created this organizational situational plan. And a lot of young coordinators make that mistake. They think they can just go out there and call plays. And then on the other side of that, sometimes you just have too many. You got a third down menu and you got 8 calls on your third down menu. How many calls, how many times are you going to be in third down? First of all, figure out how many plays you're going to call. So, most high school guys, unless you're just flying around, you're going to call, 40, 45, 50 plays a game, maybe. So how many times are you going to be in third down? So if that's the case, if you're only going to be on third down, say, 7, 8 times, then you probably need 3 or 4 calls, and get those calls and be really good at them. Different formations. So even overloading that structure can be a mistake, and it makes you be more reactive versus structure. So you want to be a guy who's preparing for decisions and not reacting to problems. And like I said, once again, all this stuff is over on the website. If you want a copy of these things, be more than happy to share them with you. They're over in the staff room. Confidence, obviously, we talked about this again. We're beating a dead horse. If you haven't figured it out, this whole deal and the whole deal about being a successful coordinator is about being organized and finding that magic rep. Just doing things over and over and over until you get really good at them. Saying the same things, being organized in your process, and then making sure that your kids are familiar in situations. Kids aren't familiar if they've never been in 3rd and 5. They're not familiar if they've never, if they haven't had any goal line stuff. If you haven't practiced overtime, we have a competition period. Sometimes that competition period is 4 plays from the 10. And if you do that a couple times a week, especially during preseason, you can do it, every other day. And those guys will be like, well, shoot, man, we've been in overtime before. But if you've never practiced overtime and then you find yourself in overtime, you're like, oh, hell, your kids are like, okay, what are we doing? I'm nervous now. Like, nah, dude, we've done competition 10 times. We've done overtime. Shoot, we win 6 out of the 10 of those. We're all right. Let's just go get it. Let's go make a play. Um, and then when pressure comes, they're used to that. They know what the calls are going to be. They're not super excited about it because you've put them in those situations. You've given them those practice reps that match Friday night. And then you as a coach, you've practiced it enough. You have your menus put together that when you get yourself in that situation, you don't freak out. And so that's really, really important that you build those confidence pieces. You're 3rd and 8. Well, we practiced 3rd and 8. We had, 2 periods during the week of third and middle. So we know on 3rd and 8, these are the calls we're going to make. I'm not nervous because this is what's on my menu, and you've created that, and I think that's important. Um, you know, so here's kind of that other thing. If you prepare better, you're going to coach more confident. So when you don't prepare, or you don't prepare correctly, you're going to have uncertain decisions. You know, you're guessing on what you want to do in 3rd and 7. You hadn't sat down and thought about it. One of the best books ever was Bill Walsh's first book, and that's the one you can't hardly find. But you look in his book, and he talks about script and plays, and he's like, look, man, it's so much easier to come up with ideas and come up with scripts and come up with game plans when you're sitting in your office than it is when you're on the sideline on Friday night or Saturday or Sunday. So sit in your office, sit home, and say, okay, these are the 3 or 4 plays I feel really confident based on what they're doing These are the answers. Obviously you'll have cover two answers, cover three answers, cover four answers, man answers. Hopefully you're designing plays that answer all those questions at the same time. About the, like, just like the TikTok I did the other day about my best third and medium. We talked about running 95. We have a deep ball, we have a stationary curl on the backside, you got the crosser, and then of course you got the shallow if you get man. So there's all kind of different answers in that. So are you doing these things over here on the left? Are you giving mixed messages? Um, are you not really organizing your reps? Are you just out there running plays to be running plays? Are you running plays and designing practice with a purpose? I think that's going to hurt you. But if you have your situational plans already together, if everybody knows what you're going to do because you've been practicing it during the week, and then here's, best one is like number three, like rep what you call, man. Like if you know these are your deals, call these plays a lot. Um, that's why, like, defensively, we like to prepare for the three best runs and the three best passes. I don't like a 20-page scout book, where we draw up every play that they run, because I just kind of feel like, look, this is what they're gonna do. And if we can get good at stopping, the things that they like to do, and then make them do things differently, or things that they're not as comfortable doing, I think we're gonna be okay. One of the first things back in the day, air raid wise, we used to laugh because we would get trade film and we're like, yeah, they're not going to do that, and we would have to guess. I mean, it's not like that anymore because everybody's running a spread and do those kind of things. But back in 2010, 2011, we would have to guess, and then we would go on Friday night, and guys would come out and they would be doing things completely different, things they had never done before. And it was a laugh because, like, you've been practicing something 4 days against something that we've been doing since July, and that never worked out so well. We were always pretty, able to be pretty good with that. So, once again, it's an ideal where you want to prepare the plan, teach the plan, practice the plan, and be able to execute the plan. And you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're underprepared, and then you put yourself, bad. And basically that goes back to, being organized. And so these are kind of little things, and it sounds like we're saying the same things over and over and over. And that's really, really important. If you're going to be a good coordinator, if you're going to be somebody who's going to be very, very effective, it's really about having a really clear communication system, a really clear use of time, workflow during the week. Practice is established. It puts your kids in plans, or places that where they find themselves on Friday night, they've already been there, and it's not a surprise. And I think that's huge. If you can simplify the game, you just as clear, like we talk about clear answers, connected concepts. If they do this, we're going to do that. Like our team knows when we're going to run counter. They know when we're going to run counter. They know when we're going to do this. They know when we're going to do that. We're taking out plays. There's no sense in running, especially defensively. We're not adding a million things. We got A gap stunts, B gap stunts, C gap stunts, and then we're just going to get good at them. And then, we're going to try to disguise by stemming our fronts, or doing different things like that. We're not trying to get crazy. We don't need 18 different coverages. We just want to get good at the two or three that we run. Not try to outsmart people. I think the biggest mistake that young coordinators make and young coaches make, is they want to sound smart. They get in a room and they use big words, and, oh, we do this when we do that, and we do this and we do that, and we do this and we do that. Okay, well, you are a very, very intelligent young fella, man. You've played at a high level, or you've been around high level guys, and you can use these high level words. But what can your kids do? And I think that's the biggest mistake a lot of young coaches make, is they want to do too much because they want to sound intelligent. Oh man, we're doing this and do that, and I think, going back to the air raid, because obviously that's my thing. But people are wanting to change things, and, what do you do? Well, what about this, or what about that? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And then I always hit them with, well, why are you doing that? And well, I mean, I don't know. I just, I want to do them. Okay, but why? Why are you changing something that ain't broke? Just to do something different. I mean, innovation for the sake of innovation is really not necessary, but innovation for the, to change and make something better, it is. So if you're just changing something to be changing it, or changing it to sound smart, then, that's really not smart. You want to reduce that volume. You want to have consistent rules. Worry about being able to execute. And, I can remember the first time, When Coach Salas worked for me and then he moved away, he said, you're going to want to add too much. And I've told this story a bazillion times about having a conversation with Mike Leach and him having a conversation about some play. And he said, oh, hey, what do you think? And I look at him and I say, hey, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to take out to put that in. And he's like, yo, you get it. Wrap yourself around, a core group of concepts and just stay with those concepts, and then make sure you can coach those concepts up against everything that you see, and then just get good at it. And I think that's really, really important. Don't just, don't be that guy that goes to a clinic, listens to a dude talk for 15, for 45 minutes or an hour, and then goes back and tries to change everything he does. Just take something away, get a nugget. If you can get a nugget from today, reducing the volume, being organized, and putting your kids in situations are things that are going to make you a great coordinator as you move forward in your career. So as a new guy, understand less is more. Organization is the number one. Communication, having that common terminology is so important. When everybody says this, they all mean that, especially if you're new to a staff and you bring somebody new in who maybe comes from a different system. This one thing might be one thing here, mean one thing here, but mean something somewhere else. And I think that's hugely important. But the most important thing is that keep things as simple as possible. The more simple things are, the better players play. Because great coordinators think differently. Great coordinators think proactively. You've planned for every scenario. Good calls over perfect calls. Sometimes the best call is the call that gives you second down or gives you third down. Those things are way more important than the perfect call. If it gives you another shot, sometimes punting is a great call. But you've looked at yourself, you've seen what this scenario is. And we'll talk about this here in a second. You kind of game planned based on situations. Your processes. You have those kind of things. And like I said, I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but you can get a hold of this. Oh, like I said, over on the website, everything is over there. If you join up, those kind of things are there. It's a really cool idea, but you want to be a proactive coordinator. You don't want to be a reactive coordinator. Reactive coordinators get themselves into trouble, and more often than not, you're sitting in the coach's office late Friday night or early Saturday morning saying, dang, I forgot about this call. And that call would have been the perfect play. But if you would have sat down and put yourself in situations and had a more organized thought process, you would have found yourself in a process to where you would have been in a better situation. So I think that's really, really important. What are some of the takeaways? You don't need to change everything immediately. Find one area and fix it, whether it's practice, whether it's communication. If you're brand new on staff, I think the most important thing is sitting down and having a language check. See if everybody speaks the same language. And if you don't, you guys need to get on that same language. This is what we do. This is what this means. This is what that means. And it may sound elementary, but I promise you, if you'll take time when you first start off doing those things, it'll really, really pay off on the back end. Look at your communication system. What's your weekly workflow? Have you decided what that's going to be? Sit down, as you're in spring ball, you're working on certain things, but then what's your weekly in-season workflow going to be? What's your out-of-season workflow? How are you going to organize your practices? Are you going to script your plays? We used to have a wristband system, we had all our and it just kind of worked out. Like our Monday plays were under one column, our Tuesday plays were under one column, Wednesday plays, so on and so forth. So we just went off the wristband, like, hey, today we're doing blue column, tomorrow we're doing green column, tomorrow, Wednesday we're doing orange column. So that's kind of how we designed our wristband to look like that. So we had certain plays on those days. Super important, especially air raid, because we're kind of a 3-day install, then we rinse and repeat. So today might be a vertical day, tomorrow might be a cross day, the next day might be a shallow day, however that works out. So just have your situational plan and your menus, and then your call sheet structure is really, really important as well. Just improving those things incrementally will make you a better coordinator as you move forward, because trust me, you're going to struggle. There are going to be some times where you're going to feel overwhelmed, and you're going to want to be the coordinator, Everybody wants to be the coordinator. I want to be offensive coordinator. I want to be this. I want to be that. But it's not about calling plays, man. It's about creating organization and creating a system of communication and those kind of things that make Friday night easy and make Friday night fun. Um, and so, kind of here's kind of an example of things that you might want to look at as you're preparing your game plan. This is kind of script in the field. I've done videos on this before. Um, but as you're generating your plan and putting your guys into situations, you kind of have four zones. You got your coming off, you got your open field, you got your red, and then you got your goal line. So these are situations where you put yourself in. Um, what are you going to do? How do you define each one? Um, if you organize your field, offensively like this, and then it helps you prepare your situations. It gives you more simple decisions. It helps you win on Friday nights doing these kind of things. And I learned this from How Mummy. What are your primary goals on short yardage? What are your primary goals on third and medium? What are your primary goals on third and intermediate, third and long, so on and so forth? And then when you're building your cheat sheet, what are your coverage beaters? Offensively, if they're going to do man, these are the things we're going to do. And then obviously, air raid wise, we like to track cut touches. And those kind of things, and then looking at practice, how do we implement this kind of stuff? So like I said, not going to go through this a whole lot. We've been talking for about 50 minutes right now, and just really wanted to kind of give you an idea of what we do. I mean, here's our game plan, kind of a game plan sheet. First and 10, second and short, second and medium. What's our focus going to be? What are our program answers? Game plan by area. So you do your red zone, your short yardage, your core area, shot area, red zone. This is kind of how you want to put yourself together. Give yourself some reminders. These are notes. I used to always tell myself, throw screens early, get your quarterback confident, get some good touches early, easy catches, don't make it difficult, build everybody's confidence up. So that those are kind of things that you want to think about as you're building your game plan. And once again, all this stuff's over on the website. If you want to check that out, you can look at that. And so just kind of some final thoughts. Good coordinators are going to do more than call plays. They're going to build structures. They're going to work on communication or organization, workflow. It's not about being complex, and I think that, like I said, I'll reiterate that one more time. Young guys make that mistake. You want to be complex when you don't have to be. Your goal is to be clear, confident, and be able to execute. And in my opinion, that's always been limiting your menus, organizing your situations. And putting your kids in situations that they're going to see on Friday nights. All right. So if you have any kind of questions, that's kind of the presentation tonight. Just kind of a new coordinator boot camp. Just kind of some little ideas I threw together. If you have any questions, you can type them in the box. You can follow me at Coach Coltharp on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok. Shoot me a message. Like I said, I know it's Saturday night. There's been a few guys in and out of here tonight. We had a couple little technological issues, but not too many. We'll get this thing worked out as we move forward. But like I said, I wanted to do this. This is kind of our new model. We're going to do things live and do those things. And I see Coach Salas stop by. I appreciate him coming in. And just like I said, this will be on the web page on the YouTube channel as we grow the Varsity Edge. We're just going to do some more things YouTube live. We'll have our next one here in a couple of weeks. We're going to take a break for Memorial Day weekend, and then we'll figure out our next one. If you have some ideas or some things you'd like me to cover, just a quick 1 hour chit chatting about this, chit chatting about that, be more than happy to do that. And I'll just hang around for the next couple of minutes. Matter of fact, I'll shoot a tweet out right now, see if anybody has any questions about just kind of coordinating and things that I've learned over the years. Q&A is open on the YouTube and things that I've learned from some guys that I've worked around, and I've been very, very fortunate to have played for some great coaches and worked with some great coaches, and been friends with some great coaches as well. So I'll hang out for the next couple of minutes. If not, I appreciate you guys stopping by. If you're just finding this course or this conversation, I appreciate you doing that. If you drop a like on it, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I'd appreciate it. You can check out my other channel, Coach Coltharp Connect, where we do a lot of different things. We talk about not only football but life and different things like that. And once again, I appreciate you guys stopping by for Varsity Edge Live. We'll see you next time.